Thanks for coming by for another Monster Monday, the best way to start your week. This time around, I'm hosting another Horizon-honed horror originally created by Cameron McLoud. We're going prehistoric this time around as we take a look at the alloyed allosaurus, the Ripperfang. As I said, this mecha machine monster is inspired by the allosaurus, a top predator of its time that is often, unfortunately, overshadowed by other larger theropods, such as the Tyrannosaurus rex. For the design of the Ripperfang here, Cam took some inspiration from chainsaws, buzzsaws, and the axe jaw hunting theory. The allosaurus could apparently open its jaw to a ridiculous angle, which left its bite force a bit weaker, but its neck significantly stronger. The theory is that the allosaurus would approach prey, open its maw crazy wide, and then slam its teeth into prey in a downward ripping blow. While this theory has been largely disproven or been disregarded, it inspired some ideas for Cameron that I have tried to translate over into Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I've built it as a level 14 creature that, like the remainder of the machines I've made, has the construct, robot, and tech traits. The allosaurus is noted to be of similar height to the Carnotaurus, which is huge in Pathfinder, so I decided to follow its lead in that regard. Given its size and unique attack method, I started the Ripperfang off with an extreme strength, letting it better brutalize bumbling beasts and braves. Per Cam's design, dexterity is the next highest with a value in between moderate and high, whereas its constitution is simply full-on moderate. It closes out on its positive ability scores with its wisdom, which ends up using a low value. This leads into the use of a low perception score for the Ripperfang, though this does come with dark vision to compensate it just a tiny bit. That typically leaves us with skills, which are pretty basic for this bionic beastie. Despite its decent dexterity, it has a low acrobatics, which I had actually been considering not including at all, while I only went for a high athletics despite the extreme strength and the prominence of it in the Ripperfang's kit. I wanted to make sure that players actually had a chance to escape from its grabs. Delving into the defenses of our death-dealing dino, it starts off with a moderate armor class, which is a little based on the savage abandon with which it throws itself into battle. On top of that, its hit points are low, but it possesses some very potent defenses with a resistance to both electricity and physical damage in general. It does have some weaknesses to acid and cold, but that physical resistance, even at a lower value, felt potent enough to make me go for these somewhat lower defenses. Its components do still use an armor class that is a point below extreme, and then its saving throws are a bit more typical to what I usually do. Based on its dexterity, it has a high reflex save, which might be a surprise given the lumbering sort of design of this creature. I would imagine players are likely to expect its merely moderate fortitude to be a bit higher, so I would make sure that you offer some description to its litheness and agility in its initial attack on the party so that they aren't completely misled. However, a low will save probably won't be much of a surprise, though the fact that mental effects even work on the machine might cause them some confusion. We have a neat little array of attacks for our allosaurus consisting of 2 melee attacks with a high bonus, and a ranged attack that uses a moderate bonus. These attacks offer a range of options, and we'll start with its Claw Strike. This has the ever-handy Agile trait, as well as the potent Tearing trait, letting its claws rip open bleeding wounds in its prey. With its defenses leaning a little bit on the lower side, I had it use a moderate damage rather than low, giving it a bit more of a punch to unleash upon its prey. However, its greater strength lies in its Chain Jaws, its combination chainsaw and jaws, which have the boost trait fresh from the Starfinder 2e book. The inclusion of this trait is inspired by its featuring in weapons such as the Fang Blade and Pain Blade, though the fact that it scales off of weapon grade instead of weapon dice gives it limited effectiveness for the Ripperfang. However, even without it, the Ripperfang's chain jaws deal high damage and can then capture creatures in it with its improved grab, bringing that athletics to the forefront. That merely leaves us with its Shredder Launcher Strike, and with these being buzzsaws that it essentially just launches at players, I added the Tearing trait to this range strike as well, which otherwise merely deals moderate damage. The Tearing trait was a bit of a late addition, and it may be a bit much to put on a ranged weapon, but it felt fitting for this fearsome Ferris fellow. Getting into the rest of its kit, let's start on a high note with an ability that relates to a number of other features in its design. Run Changeaws plays off of its improved grab, and with that being a free action, a Ripperfang could potentially strike, seize, and shred a sap all in a single turn. Now, said sap does get a high DC Fortitude save against the boosted damage of the Changeaws, which almost makes this similar to a Constrict. So why the two actions? Because this does more than just damage a target. It leaves a hideous gaping hole in the victim that afflicts them with a weakness to slashing and persistent bleed damage. Both things the Ripperjaw has plenty of in its arsenal. This weakness is pretty serious, so I kept it as a very limited duration, though one that the Ripperfang can still take advantage of within its next turn. However, critically failing this save means that weakness lasts until healed, forcing the party to spend resources to properly remove it. Now, where the true blue allosaurus is believed to have a weaker sort of bite, our awesome jawsome allosaurus features a mite more menacing maw. In fact, its somewhat misnamed rip-free reaction lets it shred a creature attempting to escape its fangs, leaving them bloody and potentially hurting from the weakness of its Run Changeaws. Before getting into some of its other unique effects, I want to quickly cover some of its more standardized abilities, such as Rend. Cameron's iteration of this specifically inflicted bleed damage, but since I already have the tearing trait on its claws, that ended up feeling a little redundant to me. I suppose you could alter this slightly to have it increase the bleed damage from them, but it also already has another way of doing that. Cameron's design also included a charging ability for the Ripperfang, but when I saw that he had this effect allowing the creature to move through others, I decided to simply recreate it as a trample. This adds some mobility to its arsenal, and allows it to spread the love a bit by dealing its jaw damage to likely multiple creatures at a high DC. But that is not all this does. I had to search it up a bit, but I finally found the Aurochs Herd, a creature that features a slightly modified trample ability. While their take on the ability knocked victims prone on a failed save, our bloodletting battlebot inflicts persistent bleed damage on a failed save instead, mostly to keep it on theme. Also along these lines is the Ripperfang's Flak Cannon. It's a rather basic area effect that deals limited use area damage with a high DC reflex save, but I still think this is a fun ability. I like the idea, the concept that this flak and shrapnel is made from matter that the Ripperfang has gathered with its Changeaws, stuff that they've shredded but haven't digested of sorts, that have otherwise been superheated and then regurgitated as an additional offensive option. I also think that having a slightly off-theme ability like this can help keep players on their toes. Rounding out the Ripperfang's retinue of abilities, we have the Bouncing Buzzsaw, which isn't nearly as fun as it sounds. At least, not for the players. This 2-action ability deals damage based on the Ripperfang Shredder launcher, but uses a high DC basic reflex save. By itself, it's not much, but that is where the bouncing part comes into play. Through complex calculations aided by its computer brain, the Ripperfang can launch this in such a way that it ricochets to and between multiple targets, with the verbiage and general design being based off of the Chain Lightning spell, right down to a critically successful save putting a stop to it prematurely. Unlike the Flak Cannon, this ability has no cooldown, potentially forcing the players to scatter, which will in turn set the Ripperfang up to descend on a lone victim and run its Changeaws while they're distant from their healer. That covers the carnage of our Colossus here. This bionic beast barrels into brouhahas with blades buzzing and breath blasting, born for butchery and bound to brutalize any braves that bother to battle it. The Ripperfang is armed with a wide array of weapons and abilities to make it a threat, and with the range of them, the heroes need to work fast and take it down before it can start doing the same to them. Between its wide-hinged attacks, the ability to lay out weaknesses that even other creatures could take advantage of, and the persistent bleed that it inflicts, players need to come together as best they can, or else they'll end up falling apart. Let me know what you think of this creature and what other sorts of monsters you'd like to see in a comment. If you like what you see here and want more, be sure to leave a like and then subscribe to the channel. You can also check out the blog, which is linked below along with the Twitter and Discord. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.